Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry about that. Just give them a Hey, we do have a question from Chris. Let's see here. We're moving away from AD sync managed accounts to SSO SAML. We expect to use the Active Directory module in some capacity to support this. However, we might collect group definitions in some alternative way. The SSO documentation explains that the user's email address must be unique. But what happens when a user's email address changes? Will the SSO SAML process create a new entity account record? That is a good question. I don't know. Let me look at what, if any, value we have set in on our support server. I think it will probably create a new account right now. Though I think we can actually account for, well, this is an interesting question, Chris. I'm not entirely sure. Let me see. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to look at some values off screen, see if I can identify if we currently use identifier. If we use user identifier for anything for SSO accounts. I know we do for Active Directory accounts, which is, I'm sure, part of what you're asserting in your example.
Right. I think Active Directory is hopefully trying to use another sort of AD value to
It is. Yep.
be the key value, the actual ID, the entity, the account ID. And that is then also helping to block some of the duplication.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it's completely foolproof, but on the other hand, I think it might be just sort of like an ongoing source of errors that then prompts us to go fix up decisions and things are happy again.
Yeah, there are times even where we can get into a bad state. Let's see here. Bear with me just a sec. And okay, we do. All right, so we save the email address into the user identifier for a SSO account, as well as into the email address. But like, so you have someone who say chris@decisions.com comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you've changed your email to Chris1. So I think Decisions is going to see that as a net new account and create a new account for you.
And this is because the ID is actually the email address?
Well, there is a separate account ID, right? We do have a property on an account, like a GUID for account ID.
Right.
But what I'm wondering, but like the inbound request, like, so the first time you try to log in as Chris1, Chris1's not sending its Decisions ID because it doesn't have it, right?
Right.
And you can't look up Chris1 and relate it to Chris@decisions.com because those values are different now, right? So it doesn't have like any metadata that says, hey, I was called this, but now I'm called this, therefore update me.
Does it, so is the account ID like a local GUID when
it is?
Okay.
In fact, if we look at that, we could I could show you that really quick.
Well, I mean, that just sort of proves the point that if it's relying on an email address as the way to match up the current person logging into whatever destination account, then as soon as that changes, it would be obliged to create a new one, which is what you're concluding too.
Exactly, that's correct.
And that's what I was concluding too, but I couldn't see that in the documentation anywhere. But that starts to bring up some of the fussy questions about the login flow. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's very clear that the login flow has got to do some amount of work, which is
Correct.
at minimum going to be, okay, let me make sure you're in the right groups.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the
Exactly.
bare minimum, but now that doesn't help us out with the situation of, well, but what if you're logging in under a new email address, right? And I don't know if that login flow has an option to say, hey, stop the bus. This is actually that account. Don't go create a new one.
If we could use an outbound call that we could somehow make to the IDP to confirm that Chris1 is Chris, it's possible, because you should be able to make a service call from the login flow SAML or SSO login flow to the IDP to get something, right? Maybe on the account does not exist path, you could somehow, very vague, I don't know what it would look like in the moment right now, confirm that Chris1 is Chris.
There's a account does not exist path. I was under the impression it was a singular flow. How did that path get involved?
Well, I'm just saying, like, you can have that flow do whatever you want. So one of the things you get in the SAML response would be the email address of the user logging in. Mm-hmm. And so you could construct that flow to check to see if that account exists in the account table or not. And then set one up. Like, in fact,
does
see if I can pull up an example of one.
Does the custom login flow actually create the account?
Does. Yep. It absolutely does, yeah. Let me install the SAML module here. And I can see it comes preset with some configuration. Let's look at it really quick. I might have to restart my service after installing SAML module.
And I think that was really the thrust of where I was going is if I have an opportunity to, in some sense, do some follow-up work before actually creating the account, I think we're in a position to do something about this change.
Yeah, exactly. So here's your flow. This is a special type of flow to default create account. And then when the first time you log in, this flow is called. And so you can handle, theoretically, if you can make a call to that other system, if you could validate the Chris1.
Are you showing something?
Am I not sharing my screen right now? Have I not been sharing my screen this entire time? Wow.
I got nothing.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, Caitlin, that'd be a wonderful help next time, please. Sorry about that, everyone. I did not realize I wasn't sharing anything. Yeah, I'm in this here's where I'm at. Let me tell you. I'm in the add identity provider in the edit SAML settings in system settings after having installed the SAML module. And I scroll down here in this editor add identity provider screen to this SAML default create account. I'm editing this flow, and you can see here what it does is it actually sets up a new account for you. But you could do whatever you need to in this flow, assuming you can make some outbound call to confirm that this is an existing account. And in which case, assuming that happens here, you could just do a branch into a update account step. That's definitely doable. Something that you should be able to support with this pattern.
All right. So is this a very specific flow and it has to be this flow that runs, or does this live in a specific folder, or how does my SAML setup actually connect to this, or when you create the SAML, does it create this thing?
This flow is a consumer. So with SAML, like you try to log into dnh@decisions.com, right? dnh.decisions.com. Decision says I have SSO turned on. I'm going to redirect you to your identity provider. So you're on Auth0 or something like that, right? You log in, and when you log in, it redirects you back to the portal, and then this flow consumes that redirect request.
Okay. Now, what I'm driving at though is I'm thinking about this flow. I foresee some some work to go into this to try
Mhm.
and mitigate the problem of, how we like to change names around here and email addresses. A problem I have more than a little experience with. Now, then if I, get that all sorted out, my question, but the follow-up question would be, now, how do I promote that solution to the next environment?
Mhm. I mean, it
Uh,
is just they are just flows. You could export and import them as needed. Like you,
would it
go
be
ahead.
better potentially to, well, I mean, still, this basic flow in some fashion, whatever changes we want to do here has to
Mhm.
get promoted to the other
Sure.
environments. And that's what
That's
I would
true.
hope the repository can do for me in some manner, but then that means I need to connect those dots.
That's true. Yeah. I mean,
I don't know if that
yeah.
gets me into partly like even the SSO configuration pieces may have to get into the repository to be moved around. I don't know if that's
Those
true too.
don't get moved around now. Admittedly, it
Okay.
is kind of a little silly that some parts of the module are per server and the actual flow itself would be migrated between them. But like your settings object, the configuration, you do those independently server by server. There's no concept of moving setting objects between environments. So you'd have
Uh,
to, the steps would be to go configure SAML, install and configure SAML in every environment, and then move the flow you've built on dev to like this flow here with the edits, but from dev to the higher environments
all right.
in
And that's
some
where,
way.
so this is in System Designer's Catalog System Defaults. That's what I'm reading from your heading, that
Mm-hmm.
would be where I find this flow.
It may not exist until you install the SAML module, just to be clear. I'm not certain if it pre-exists or if it gets installed with the SAML module being installed.
Is it something that we could potentially add to a project that's in the
Yeah,
repository,
for sure. You can absolutely do that.
which might then bring the warning of, hey, don't deploy that until you've actually got the SAML installed, because then we don't know who wins in that little battle.
Well, without the SAML module being installed, this flow can't do anything. The SAML
Right.
module is the controls, has code in it to call this flow. And so it would effectively be worthless. It could be pre-deployed with no effect on your on the environment. Not that you should do that, but
Right. I worry though that installing the SAML module would prompt it to replace the existing flow.
Okay,
And of
that's
course, there's this
possible.
warning of editing is not recommended.
Yeah, that's just, we've been throwing that around a lot recently. I don't think it's actually rightfully stated on this one, but there's like certain things. I think it's everything in decisions core system designers catalog system defaults. Let's see here. Don't save. Let's look.
Yeah, I mean, I have bumped into that problem too. I've even got a report asking, has anybody been mucking with system stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Just to slap their knuckles.
Yeah, it looks like it gets installed with the module, and it's part of the decisions.saml project already.
Oh
So you
my.
could check that into the repo without issue.
Oh, sort of like so the repo is not going to have decisions.saml project. So that means we could
Mm-hmm.
get a way of checking this in and moving
For
it
sure.
that way.
Yep, you could absolutely support that.
All right, that makes me feel a whole lot better about how this. Now, I noticed that you have this step create back at the actual, well, back in that side, that flow.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like it's mostly about a single step create, right?
Yeah, correct. Actually, so let me go back here. That step is, yeah, that's a, create account for IDP step. It's just an account service step. Where are we at here? But there's a variety of account steps available inside, integration, internal services, account service, if you need to do something different. There's a variety of create account steps depending on what you might need to do. Add new account.
Would you suggest doing one of those in place of this step potentially?
No, not on the normal path. In the example
Okay.
though, in your example, like if you could confirm that it exists somewhere else, then you're talking about probably doing like an update account and like some sort of change value on the email address. So you need to do like so then you're just talking about one of these update account steps, or maybe even just a save entities step who's set to type account. That would work. That would work fine as well.
I guess what I'm a little surprised at is at the start of this flow, we have the IDP's reply in hand, right?
Correct.
And if I go into create, that create SAML account for IDP, it would probably take the IDP response and provide to me either a new account or the existing account, in which we discussed at the start here, right? So in spite of the title of create, it might actually behave as a lookup step.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So I think that's what threw me as I'm thinking about, it says create, but we know that you can't always want to create. So what does that mean? That's what I'm just getting my head around.
Okay, that's a fair point. So maybe this only runs if maybe this actually runs if the account doesn't exist. Interesting. Let me see here. Like, oops, sorry. You might be doing something. Let me look here again. There's another flow we can use. Okay, process if user not found. Run flow in background. Redirect none. So that so in this example, user's not found. It runs here. It creates an account. You might have to pair that with some other kind of thing, like a always check on login, as opposed to, because it's already assuming the context of that flow is that it's already determined the account doesn't exist. That's kind of unfortunate. I was actually thinking it was just on login, but that's what this thing I just selected is.
Right, and that strikes me as the right spot to manage group membership.
Yes, exactly. This is the place. Yes, you're 100%
run
right.
flow in each login. Now, so that then explains why it says create. And now the other piece of that puzzle, though, now the create step is wholly independent. As you point out, I could potentially dodge it, but then we need to be able to provide the output as a match to what the whatever that create would have done. Is that a true statement?
Say that again for me, Chris.
So, okay, so this is a SAML login flow, but for the SAML account create flow, whatever that was from memory, what was the output of that flow? Did it have any?
I don't think so. Let's go look. It's just it doesn't send data anywhere. Account ID comes back, but it doesn't get consumed by anything that you can use. But like if this flow fails to run, you'll get a weird like could not receive error, error could not account ID not returned or something. But you don't use it for anything. This is like it run in the background.
Right. But what I find myself wondering though is when we get into this flow, my hope would be we'd be able to determine, hey, actually, you're a new name for an old account, right? So let me fix up that account record, right? Because you got a new name. I can verify that by checking some other sources. So now that I know that you are a new name for an old account, I'll fix up the account. If I bypass the create and then hand out the old account ID as quote what that is, I'm hopeful that is enough to have everything work the way we want it to. But that assumes that the create SAML account is in fact just kind of a convenience for, hey, build out an account record, an entity account record on behalf of this data and then just hand back the account ID.
That's correct, yes.
Which would then mean if I substitute that with an existing account ID because I know, well, you're actually this one, that should be just as good.
I don't think so. Like you're saying.
So right after that log step is where I'd basically end up, in sort of a giant decision process to ask the question, are you actually new or are you somebody else? Or are you somebody we already know?
Actually, I still think it didn't find, I still think, I still think, yeah, you're right. Like we could still check here and then pass out the existing account ID after updating it. Yes.
That's what strikes me as the easier way to
for sure. I was thinking about that incorrectly. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, you're right.
Resolve the problem that I'm dealing with.
Right. Yep, that's 100% right.
All right, and I think from what I'd seen before, I understood there was the login, run flow on login.
Yeah. That's where you would do like group syncs at, right? Like keep groups up to date.
Exactly, and I think with SAML, depending on what my administrative group can do for me, it might be that all I need to do is to keep up to date with the groups that are defined, keep a local copy of that in some helpful way. And I wouldn't need to do a follow-up, service call to actually work that out. But that's, negotiation I need to do with my administrators about what's actually in the SAML response.
Yep.
All right. That tells me what I was really eager to know.
Okay. Yeah, you bet, man. Happy to help.
All right. Thanks.
You bet. You exposed, you hit basically as much as I know about SAML. So anything more than that, I would have been unable to assist in. So appreciate you only going so far as to ask the questions that I could attempt to answer. So.
Well, actually seeing the two flows now, which I only knew of one, which really had me kind of in knots. It is such a huge help. So I appreciate that.
Okay, you bet. All right, and looks like anonymous attendee is back. The major limitations of using the SDK, why do you not expose all methods as steps from libraries that Decisions is using? How to use dot notation on methods that are exposed. I do think we expose all methods that we use as steps under internal services. I'm pretty sure everything under integration .NET libraries includes all of the methods that we reference. I'm not saying it does. I believe it does. If there's certain ones that are missing, that might be intentional. It might be unintentional, given the variety of methods, in .NET and the related libraries that we use. Likely that's unintentional. I don't know that we're clever enough to know what specific things to include or exclude in the libraries that we reference. How to use dot notation on methods that are exposed in the SDK? That's a great question. I don't know the answer for that. That's something that's we could get answered for you by one of our product developers through the support channel. That's a great question. I just don't actually know how to reference methods in our code base using dot notation, unfortunately. To your second question, are we pasting these in the chat? Yep, we are. Great. Yeah. Second question is how to troubleshoot an issue where we see multiple servers connected to the same DB in a cluster environment on dockerized installation, 2 servers. That just means that if you're seeing the error that multiple servers are connected to the same DB, that means that you don't have clustering set up. That error shows when there's multiple records in the server table and clustering is not enabled. So you'd have to ensure that on system setting clustering is enabled. and that you've got, a proper Redis now in V8, a proper Redis connection string to support that cluster. Like here on my local, I probably have multiple results in my server table. If I clap some of this stuff here, so here's servers. Nope, just one for now. Okay, good. But yeah, if you have two servers connected to the same database, they'll show up in the server table. Containers are not. It just means that they're not clustered. But we do have a cluster setting set in container settings. I don't know what is a container setting. There was only one way to cluster decision server, and it's through clustering, enabling clustering in the database through what you see on the screen right now. What's a container setting cluster? Is it like Kubernetes or some other container orchestration that is clustering the actual Docker containers themselves? If that's true, and that's what you're doing, that's not sufficient to have a cluster. Decisions itself needs to understand that it is working in a cluster, not that the host container or sets of containers themselves are clustered. Environment settings. There's an environment settings for clustering. That sounds incorrect. Is it possible to help me? And servers are in a cluster. What doc are you talking about here? Because that sounds like bad documentation. The environment variable should have no information about the cluster. Cluster data lives in the database. It doesn't live in an environment variable, as far as I'm aware. And servers are in a cluster. So just to be clear, you're saying that you have enable cluster set to true, and you have a Redis connection string defined? Have you recycled both containers after you enabled that? Then I'm unsure why you're getting that error. Are you sure it's not an old log? I'm struggling to find that because I don't think there exists an environment variable for cluster. What is the environment variable name that you're using for clustering? Port 80M reference, but I will double check. I'm not sure what that means either. Sorry, everyone. Our anonymous attendee is asking in the Q&A. I'm trying to. Caitlin, can we make sure all these get posted into the chat, please? People could attempt to follow along. Okay, what else do we got? Anybody got any other questions for us? Clustering, turn on clustering. Clustering variables? Why do we have okay, what document is this, Kirsten? See it now?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, creating environmentless files.
God, stop with the notifications. Pause notifications for 30 minutes. There we go. Interesting. Clustering variables. I did not know that this was a thing. I also don't understand why it's a thing, personally. I don't know why you would ever need an environment variable to override this, since both of these values live in the database. So it might be worthwhile to, maybe there's some weird, maybe there's a problematic conflict here, anonymous attendee, between your environment variable and your clustering in the database. I'm not sure why we need to give you a environment variable for this. Hopefully someone will answer for me, but I'm confused by that. What else? Anybody else got any questions for us today? Okay, we're at 12:32. Looks like that's all the questions for today. Okay, all right, thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon. See ya.
Well,